Hi everyone, welcome to another video, and today we're going to be going through the topics of energy and water, which covers units 3.5 and 3.6. So first we're going to be looking at the importance of energy sources in everyday life and within countries, individuals, and societies. So the first thing that relies on energy sources is food production, and this is because the higher demand of food means that more mechanization is needed on fields. Okay, the next thing that relies on energy sources is also industrial growth, because factories need energy for manufacturing and also operating systematically. The next thing that relies on the importance of energy sources is transportation, and this is because vehicles need petrol and diesel to run. The next thing that's important is urbanization, because this means that more people need to access domestic appliances, and this can be like kettles, toasters, and just things you would use in your house. And this of course relies on electricity, which comes from the burning of fossil fuels and other energy sources. So the final thing we'll cover that relies on the importance of energy is economic development, and this is because rising wealth causes people to have more disposable income for domestic appliances. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at some non-renewable energy sources, and so this can be coal, oil, and gas, and also nuclear energy is also a type of non-renewable energy source. And the spec specifically says that you need to know the advantages and disadvantages of nuclear energy, so we're going to go through that. So the advantages is that only small amounts of uranium are needed. The next advantage is that it won't run out in the foreseeable future. The next advantage is that it does not produce greenhouse gases, so doesn't produce greenhouse gases. And it also reduces the reliance on fossil fuels, and also increases energy security. Okay, so even though there are a lot of advantages for this, there's many disadvantages, of course. So one is that the waste is radioactive and expensive expensive to dispose of. The next disadvantage is that it can be used by terrorists because they can use them to make nuclear bombs, etc. And it also increases the risk of nuclear accidents, such as the nuclear spillover in Chernobyl in Ukraine. The next disadvantage is that it is expensive to maintain power stations. And finally, it has a high decommissioning cost. Okay, so that's all our non-renewable energy sources covered. And now we're going to be looking at the renewable energy sources. So one type of renewable energy source you need to know is fuel wood, and all you need to know is the importance of it. So it's important in LDC, EDC/rural areas because those areas might not have access to the electricity grid that runs nationwide in their country. It also doesn't require high-tech equipment because fuel wood is generated from burning logs from trees and then using it for domestic heating and cooking, which is the next factor that relies on the importance of fuel wood. And it can also be sold as a cash crop, meaning that people can sell these to generate income. And this is extremely beneficial in areas such as low-income countries or areas where there's lots of farm area where you can grow these crops. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at geothermal power, and this is basically power that is generated from the heat from volcanoes or hot springs near them. So the advantage of this is that it's a reliable source of energy, and it also lowers greenhouse gas emissions, and it produces hot water alongside electricity. And the disadvantage of this is that it's expensive to be able to obtain, and also it might emit toxic gases. So this might not necessarily mean greenhouse gases, but toxic gases like sulfuric gases, etc. And also the high temperature causes maintenance issues. Okay, so the next renewable energy source we're going to be looking at is wind power, and this is energy that's generated from the spinning of turbines, which are turned from the wind. So some advantage of this is that there's no greenhouse gases, there's no air pollution, it can be of a small or large scale because it will generate enough energy either way. It's also cheap to run, and it can also be on land or offshore. And the disadvantage of this is that it only works when there's wind. So there's no wind, the turbine won't be able to turn, and therefore no electricity will be generated. It can also cause visual and noise pollution because it may not look or seem aesthetically pleasing for those living near it. Many turbines are needed to generate sufficient electricity, and it can also kill birds due to spinning turbines, which affects migration patterns. Okay. So the next renewable energy source we're going to be looking at is hydroelectric power. And some advantages that it doesn't produce greenhouse gases. It controls flooding downstream because it involves the construction of a dam, and it can also provide water storage because it can hold all the water upstream. However, some disadvantages of this is that areas behind the dam might be flooded, and this may happen due to extreme weather conditions like tropical storms, hurricanes, etc. And it can also cause visual pollution. And it can also impact fish migration downstream. It can also cause displacement of communities because the construction of the dam may cause people to move so that the dam can be built, and it can also be expensive for building and maintenance. Okay, so next we're going to be looking at solar power, and this is basically energy generated from light being absorbed by solar panels on roofs of buildings. Some advantages of this is that there's no greenhouse gases, as is the same with most renewable energy sources. There's also no air pollution. It can be small or large scale. And it can also be used in most locations. And finally, it can be incorporated into building design, so this makes it more aesthetically pleasing building design. Okay, and some disadvantages is that it may be expensive to install, and also large areas of land might be needed. It's also not reliable because it only works in sunny conditions, and it also needs to be in large numbers to produce sufficient energy. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at biofuels. So this can also be called biomass. So some advantages of this is that it's available in most locations, and it can also use waste from crops that regrow. And some disadvantages of that is that it's expensive, and it also releases greenhouse gases, as well as increasing air pollution. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the global trends in energy consumption. So as you can see, a lot of the countries with high energy consumption are up in the northern hemisphere, so around here. And as you can see, in places with lots of low-income countries like Africa and South America have lower energy consumption, and this may be because their industries may still be in the primary or secondary sectors, so there's more agriculture, mining, etc. So yeah, that's all you need to know, that there's a lot of disparity in the energy consumption between regions of the world. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to the topic of water. So there are many different methods of supplying water. So one is through the use of reservoirs and dams. And this holds water upstream for consumption. And the next method of supplying water is through wells and boreholes. So this is when water is extracted from freshwater aquifers, and this can also mean that more water can be supplied for consumption and domestic purposes. Okay, and finally, you can use desalination. And this is where water is transferred to a desalination plant where it's boiled, which separates the water from the contaminants such as the salt and other microbes that may be in the water. So water is boiled at a plant which removes salt and other impurities. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the causes of water shortages in different regions and countries. So one is the increasing population. And this is because when there's an increase in population, there will be more demand for fresh water for consumption and also for agriculture, domestic and industrial purposes. And this also will cause water stress, which in turn causes water shortages. And the next is the lack of precipitation. And this is because if you're in an area where there's little to no precipitation, like the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, it will be very hard to obtain fresh water, and therefore it can cause water shortages in those kind of areas. The next is poor water management, and this usually occurs as a result of corruption. So water is not equally distributed within the region or the country where water shortages is an issue. The next is industry and agriculture, as I already mentioned in one of the above points. So again, if there's an increase in industrialization or agriculture, this increases the need for water, which in turn causes water shortages. And also droughts can also cause water shortages because droughts are extended periods of dry weather, which leads to extreme dryness in certain regions and which causes water to evaporate. So there'll be a lack of water for consumption and other purposes. So we're going to be looking at the impacts of these water shortages. So one is geopolitical conflict over water resources, and this is because due to the limited availability of the water, different countries and regions might engage in conflict in order to obtain water needed to flourish economic growth in their respective regions or countries. Another is water-borne illnesses such as cholera, malaria, etc. And this can cause weakened health and in more cases death. The next is that children miss out on education to collect water. There's also a lack of food production, and this is because of the lack of water needed for irrigation and moisture. So this does not allow crops to grow, so therefore there will be a lack of food supply, and also decreases biodiversity and loss of habitat. And this is an impact of water shortages because there will be less moisture in ecosystems, and therefore the conditions of it may change. So different animals or plants may not be able to survive in the new dry conditions that they're found in. So next we're going to be looking at the solutions to these water shortages. So one is water recycling, and this involves placing water cans in and within communities to harvest as much water as possible so that less of it is wasted and is actually consumed, and therefore reduces water stress. The next is drip irrigation. And basically what drip irrigation is, it's an efficient method of irrigating crops in agriculture without wasting a lot of water, so more water can be conserved. The next are water efficient taps and showers. And this can also help prevent water shortages because less water is being wasted. Also, the use of grey water for gardening is an efficient way of reducing water shortages. And finally, low flush toilets can also decrease the impact of water shortages on communities. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the case studies you need for this topic. So one is your energy case study. So this can be a country that's suffering from energy shortages, or just a country that employs a wide range of energy sources. So all you need to know for this is 3 specific methods of supplying energy in that country. So your water case study is one where there's water shortages in the region. So as I said, written here, you can be like the UAE or Spain. So for this, you need to know 3 causes of water shortages, 3 effects of water shortages, and also 3 solutions to mitigate the effects of water shortages. Anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.